Marco experienced music the way deaf people did, through vibration, through visual rhythm, through emotional resonance rather than audio. He couldn't speak, couldn't sing, but he could feel bass notes in his chest, could see patterns in how musicians moved, could understand emotion conveyed through performance. Alessandro had never considered this perspective. He'd spent 40 years believing music was fundamentally about sound, about voice, about audio perfection. Marco challenged that assumption. When Alessandro played violin, Marco would place his hands on the instrument's body, feeling vibrations change with different notes. He'd watch Alessandro's fingers, learning patterns visually. He'd sense rhythm through vibrations in the floor. "You're teaching me to experience music in ways I never considered," Alessandro wrote to Marco. "And you're showing me that losing my voice didn't mean losing music, just meant finding new ways to express it." Marco smiled and signed. "Music isn't sound. Music is feeling. You still have that." And Alessandro, who'd believed his identity died with his voice, began to understand that music was deeper than vocal cords, that communication transcended words, that maybe he had more to offer than he'd believed. Alessandro Moretti had been the most celebrated tenor of his generation. For 30 years, his voice had filled opera houses across Europe. La Scala, the Vienna State Opera, the Royal Opera House. Critics called him the voice of angels. Audiences wept during his performances. Recordings of his work sold millions. Then came the surgery. A small growth on his vocal cords. Routine procedure. Expected full recovery. But something went wrong. Nerve damage, complications, permanent destruction of the delicate mechanisms that produce sound. Alessandro woke from surgery unable to speak. Not hoarse, completely silent. His vocal cords were destroyed beyond repair. Doctors explained he could still whisper slightly, but singing was impossible. The voice that had defined his identity for 40 years was gone forever. Alessandro tried adapting, attempted teaching through writing, through demonstration, through recorded examples of his former voice. But opera was his language, singing was his communication, voice was his identity. Without it, he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. After 2 years of struggling, Alessandro retreated. He bought a remote cabin in the Italian Alps, brought his instruments as reminders of what he'd lost, and resigned himself to silence. 3 years into his isolation, he found Marco. Alessandro was walking mountain trails when he noticed someone moving through trees ahead, erratic, clearly lost. He approached and found a boy, maybe 9, wandering aimlessly with tears on his face. Alessandro tried to call out, remembered he couldn't, waved instead. The boy noticed and approached cautiously. Alessandro pulled out the small whiteboard he carried for communication. "Are you lost?" The boy nodded, then gestured to his own throat and shook his head, the universal sign for can't speak. Alessandro's eyes widened. The boy was mute. They stood in mutual silence, two people unable to communicate through the most common human method. Alessandro wrote, "I can't speak either. Lost my voice to surgery, but I can help you. Do you know where you came from?" The boy shook his head, looking more distressed. Alessandro gestured toward his cabin, visible through trees. "Come. We'll figure out how to contact help." At the cabin, Alessandro learned more about the boy through written communication. His name was Marco. He'd been on a school field trip, had wandered away from the group, gotten completely turned around in the mountains. He'd been walking for hours, increasingly panicked. Marco had been born without functional vocal cords, a rare congenital condition. He'd never spoken, communicated through basic sign language and writing. Alessandro knew minimal sign language, but they managed through writing and gesture. Alessandro activated his emergency radio, contacted park services, explained the situation. Rescue would take several days. The location was remote and weather was turning. That first evening, as Alessandro prepared dinner, he noticed Marco examining his instruments, a violin, a guitar, a small keyboard, all gathering dust in the corner. Marco pointed to them questioningly. "I was a musician," Alessandro wrote, "opera singer, before I lost my voice." Marco's face showed recognition, then sadness, then curiosity. He picked up the violin carefully, held it like something precious. "Do you like music?" Alessandro wrote. Marco nodded enthusiastically. He gestured to his ears, then his chest, trying to communicate something. Alessandro understood. Marco experienced music through vibration, through feeling rather than just hearing. He'd lived his entire life finding ways to connect with a world designed for verbal communication. Alessandro picked up his violin, hadn't played in months, had been avoiding it as a painful reminder, but Marco's interest compelled him. He played a simple melody, something slow and resonant. Marco's face transformed. He placed his hands on the violin's body while Alessandro played, feeling the vibrations, experiencing music as physical sensation. His expression showed wonder, joy, understanding. When Alessandro stopped, Marco signed something. Alessandro didn't understand the specific words but got the meaning. More. Please. Alessandro played more. Marco moved closer, feeling vibrations, watching Alessandro's fingers, absorbing music through every sense except his voice. That night, Alessandro wrote, "You understand music differently than I do. How do you experience it?" Marco wrote back carefully, "I feel vibrations, see patterns in movement, sense emotion in how people play. Music isn't just sound, it's feeling." Alessandro stared at these words. For 40 years, he'd believed music was fundamentally about sound, about vocal perfection, about audio. Marco was teaching him it was deeper. Over the following days, Alessandro began teaching Marco music, not through voice, but through everything else. He taught rhythm by clapping patterns Marco could see and feel, taught melody through watching fingers move on violin strings, taught harmony by placing Marco's hands on different instruments simultaneously so he could feel how vibrations interacted. Marco absorbed it all with desperate hunger. He'd loved music his entire life, but had never had anyone teach him to understand it beyond passive listening. Alessandro was showing him structure, theory, technique. And Marco taught Alessandro something equally valuable, that music transcended sound, that losing his singing voice didn't mean losing music itself. "Put your hand here," Alessandro indicated on his violin's body. He played different notes, low, high, soft, loud. Marco felt how vibrations changed with each variation, how pitch and volume manifested as physical sensation. "You're experiencing what I'm creating," Alessandro wrote, "not just hearing it, feeling it directly. That's more intimate than most audiences ever get." Marco smiled and wrote, "You can still make music, just differently now." The statement hit Alessandro hard. He'd spent 3 years believing his musical identity died with his voice. But Marco was right. He could still create, still teach, still share music, just not through singing. Alessandro pulled out music theory books, taught Marco to read notation. The boy learned quickly, his mind sharp and hungry for knowledge. Within days, Marco could identify notes on staff paper, understand rhythm markers, recognize key signatures. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Marco wrote. "I can't sing, can't play most instruments properly without hearing them." "Neither can I anymore," Alessandro wrote back. "But we can understand music intellectually, can feel it physically, can express it through instruments, can experience it emotionally. Sound is only one aspect." Alessandro taught Marco to play percussion, the most tactile form of music. Marco excelled, his hands finding rhythms instinctively, creating patterns that resonated through his whole body. Then Alessandro did something he'd avoided for 3 years. He sang. Not with voice, but with his body. He showed Marco how opera singers use their entire bodies as instruments, how breath and posture and movement all contributed to sound production. Marco watched with fascination, then imitated. Without voice, his singing was silent, but his body moved with musical intention. His breath followed phrasing. His expression conveyed emotion. "You're singing," Alessandro wrote, silently, "but you're expressing music through your whole self. That's what singing is. Musical expression through the body. Voice is just one tool." On their 5th day together, Alessandro had an idea. He set up his keyboard, adjusted it to play through a subwoofer, a speaker designed for deep bass that produced strong vibrations. He played for Marco, who placed his hands on the subwoofer and felt the music as powerful physical sensation. His face showed pure joy. "I've never felt music this clearly before," Marco wrote. "It's like the sound is inside me." "That's how I experience singing," Alessandro wrote back. "Vibrations starting inside, resonating through my whole body. You're feeling what I used to create." They spent hours experimenting. Different instruments, different volumes, different ways of experiencing music beyond audio. Alessandro rediscovered his instruments through Marco's perspective, found new appreciation for aspects he'd always taken for granted. Marco proved a brilliant student, By the end of the week, he could identify intervals by feeling vibration patterns, could follow complex rhythms visually, could understand emotional content of pieces through watching Alessandro perform. "You have perfect understanding of music," Alessandro wrote, "not despite being mute, but because you experience it more completely than people who only hear it." When rescue finally came, Marco's teacher arrived with park rangers. She was shocked to find her missing student engaged in intense music lesson with a stranger. Alessandro explained through writing how he'd found Marco, kept him safe, taught him music while waiting for rescue. "Marco's been interested in music his whole life," the teacher said, "but we've never known how to teach him properly. He can't hear instructions, can't vocalize exercises." "How did you manage?" Alessandro wrote, "I taught him the way he experiences music. Through feeling, through watching, through understanding intellectually. Sound is only one part of music. He grasps all the other parts perfectly." Before leaving, Marco hugged Alessandro and wrote, "Thank you for teaching me music and for showing me that not having a voice doesn't mean not having music." Alessandro wrote back, "Thank you for teaching me the same thing. I thought losing my voice meant losing my identity. You showed me music is deeper than vocal cords." After Marco left, Alessandro sat in his cabin surrounded by instruments. For 3 years, he'd avoided them, seeing them as reminders of loss. Now he saw them as tools for expression that didn't require his voice. He began composing, music designed to be felt as much as heard, pieces that emphasized vibration and visual rhythm. He wrote teaching methods for students with vocal disabilities, ways to experience music beyond traditional audio. 6 months later, Marco's school contacted Alessandro. Would he consider teaching music to their students with communication disabilities, children who were mute, deaf, or otherwise unable to access traditional music education? Alessandro accepted. He developed a curriculum teaching music through vibration, visual patterns, tactile feedback, emotional expression. His students learned to experience music completely, not just orally. Most people think music is sound, Alessandro wrote in his teaching philosophy. But music is communication, emotion, expression. Sound is merely one method of conveying these things. Students with vocal or auditory disabilities don't lack musical ability. They simply access music through different channels. Our job as teachers is to open those channels. Marco remained Alessandro's most dedicated student. He visited regularly, continued learning, eventually became a percussion specialist who performed internationally. Critics praised his unique rhythmic sensitivity and profound musical understanding. "You can't vocalize," a journalist once wrote to Marco, "yet you communicate more musically than many singers. How?" Marco wrote back, "My teacher, Alessandro Moretti, the opera singer who lost his voice, taught me that music isn't sound. Music is feeling, connection, expression. I experience all of those completely. The rest is just technique." Alessandro read the interview with tears in his eyes. For 40 years, he'd defined himself by his voice. Marco had taught him that identity was deeper, that music transcended sound, that losing one form of expression simply meant discovering others. He picked up his violin and played, not for an audience, not for applause, but for the joy of creating something beautiful. His voice was gone, but his music remained, different, but no less valid. Silent singing, music beyond sound, expression that transcended the limitations of vocal cords. Marco had been right from the beginning. Music isn't sound. Music is feeling. And Alessandro still had that, had never lost it, had only forgotten how to access it beyond his voice. Now he remembered. And in teaching others, he'd found purpose beyond performance, identity beyond voice, meaning that transcended the loss that had once seemed devastating. Two people trapped in silence, teaching each other that communication happened through many languages, that music existed beyond audio, that limitation in one area simply meant developing strength in others.